Well, hello again, and welcome back to our continuing studying in 1 Peter. Today we'll be looking at 1 Peter chapter 2, and we'll be looking at verses 11 and 12. Now when you couple verses 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, this is some of the most powerful parts of all of Peter's epistle to the churches there in northern Turkey. And as you recall, Peter had established the church and us as living stones, and then the last time he even said that we would be a royal priesthood, that we were the ones to take the message of who God is to the world. Now in verse 11 he actually kind of starts a shift in pattern where he's going to start now explaining how believers should be living as exiles in this world, and in this world that rejects the message of Jesus Christ. And that since we are the witnesses to the gospel, we should live in a manner that is worthy of God and honoring God and pleasing God. Let's go ahead and read 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Behold, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Now for our then principles, I'm going to kind of break down each of these phrases and try to see what they mean. Now he starts off with the word beloved. Now only twice in this epistle does Peter use the personal term of endearment, addressing everybody as beloved. He does it here in verse 2:11, and he does it again in verse 4:12. What he's saying is that this advice and these exhortations are coming from a friend, right? Someone who cares and someone who has their best interest at heart. Then he goes on to say sojourners and exiles. Well, sojourners, that's not a word that we use very often, but we know what it means. It means that they're temporarily living someplace or staying someplace. Well, this home here on this world is not our real home. Our real home is with God in heaven. And Peter wants us to act like that's where our home is, that we're just sojourners and exiles here on earth. Then he goes on to say to abstain from the passions of the flesh. Now flesh in the New Testament really means a lot more than just the body or the physical appetite. Right? In fact, when Paul talks about the sins of the flesh in Galatians 5, he kind of really includes attitudes and emotions as well as the overt acts, right, of that are connected with the physical body. So you see that it's really much more than just physical acts. It's our attitude and our emotions when the writers of the New Testament are talking about the flesh. It says, wages war against your soul. Well, that should really put us all on the defense all the time, because the devil hates it when we are showing God deference and we're showing Him praise. And he's always attacking us. And this attack comes from our own self, comes from deep within us. And so we must always be constantly on guard against the devil getting his foothold in the way we live. Then he goes on to talk about the Gentiles, the non-believing Gentiles. Well, to Peter, anyone who didn't believe was a Gentile. So it was really just a general term. And he says you need to watch out. They're going to speak against you. And in the first century, that happened quite a bit, as it really does today. But in the first century, it was really more overt and more out front. I mean, again, people talked about Christians despising the Roman gods and that they hated humanity because they were so close-knit and kind of really exclusive. Not that anyone couldn't come in, but they weren't just going to allow sinners to hang out with them. They worried about their immoral conduct, right? Their love fest, and they they didn't really see it. And coming from the Romans, that was really way out of line. They talked about Christians as they tampered with people's family. I mean, there was a lot of people who were disowned by their family as they turned to Christianity. Certainly people were kicked out of synagogues, out of the daily life of the Jewish community. But this letter was really to non-Jews for the most part. And they were also being ostracized from their family, ostracized from society if they would not pay homage to the Roman gods or to Caesar, that's another thing that they talked about, is that Christians were against Caesar and didn't want to worship him. And they were also upset that they were trying to upset the apple cart of the caste system and trying to turn slaves against their masters. Of course, none of this was really true, and we'll see that in our next sections. But that's what people wanted to say about Christians, and they wanted to blame all the evils of their particular lives on Christians at the time. And then at the end there, he says, on the day of visitation. Now, commentators are kind of split as to what this day of visitation was. Was it the judgment day when Christ comes back? Or really, was it the day when the Romans came to inspect, right? And that the new Christians would be brought to trial? In reality, it probably means both. So now, what are some of the always principles we see about God in this passage? Well, we see that since we're ambassadors of Christ, that we're His representatives, that we're His royal priesthood, right, we need to always act that way. And not only do we need to act that way, but our motives need to be honoring God in all that we do. And the last always principle we see is that by our conduct, we can lead people to Christ. If we lead a life worthy of the gospel and worthy of being children of God, we will lead people to Christ. We will save their immortal souls. So now what's this passage saying to you? What's your now principles out of this? How's it speaking to you in what's happening in your life right now today? Let me know. Leave a comment. Send me an email. I appreciate them all. In fact, I just got an email yesterday that spoke from our last study. And how, in fact, that even though the church is now Christ, or we've taken over Israel's place as Christ's people, that we, just as Israel, have taken advantage of that relationship. And in fact, we've taken God for granted. So we need to always keep that in mind. And so, send me your comments. And please, tune back in next week as we continue our study in 1 Peter chapter 2. Until then, go with God's grace and with the peace that only He can provide. Amen.